Micah Miller trying to spring a pass ahead. Nobody in front of Jack Paling. Moves on with a blast and scores! Jack Paling
We aren't giving up on chances, and we just got to bottom line execute.
Waits, passes in front. Great save, Paluzzi, as she robs a Gopher in front of her. And that was number 8, Kippen Keller, on the grade A opportunity.
For me as a coach, that's the kind of D you're always looking for, because they don't grow on trees for sure. And he's done a really good job being a captain of a really young team this year.
It was a really cool thing to see for them to really appreciate what I've done on and off the ice.
to the far half wall. Jack Paling trying to play it into the corner. Now Paling turns, squares his body to the slot, sends it up high toward Jack. A shot makes its way through, and they score! Right along the blue line, Nick Paling was in front of the net, and St. Cloud State's got a lead here in the
And welcome back to the Den, Huskies Warming House Podcast fans. We are at episode number 40 already here on the show. This week is a good one. We do have a former women's Husky defenseman as part of our Healthy Scratch interview segment. Plenty to get to as far as men's and women's hockeys, and plenty of other hockey news and CenterIceView News and Notes, and plenty of other stuff, including some giveaways as well. Alongside Noah Grant, I'm Nick Maxson. Noah, it's Friday. It's mid-December. And it's a weird December here in Minnesota. And here's why. There's no snow on the ground. And we haven't had snow since October. Doesn't it seem backwards? I mean, it's just, my mind is blown. I know Minnesota in all of her glory will even the score at some point. I just hope it's not in April or May or June. I mean, it's this year, 2020 has been quite the year. But I guess I have no complaints so far. But tell me how your Friday has been going.
You know, it's kind of funny too, because I was reading online about people who are in Minnesota. Obviously I am not, I'm in northern North Dakota. But yeah, hardly any snow here as well. But they've talked about people who are out on the golf course, still golfing and cutting grass in their own yards and that sort of thing. So yeah, it's kind of weird to think about. I do worry what the spring months do hold for us as far as the weather is concerned. I mean, my Friday is okay. For listeners who have listened in on previous episodes, we did mention at one point that my dog wasn't doing so well today. And I did post this on our Twitter page as well. My dog did pass away today. Actually, by pass away, we did bring him to the vet and put him down today. So I went peacefully, obviously, and brought him back home and buried him on the land. So yeah, I mean, it's a bittersweet Friday, but my dog was 14 and had a really, really enjoyable life. So it's average, humdrum, I guess. I'm doing a little bit better than I expected to be. But, you know, one of the stories that actually caught my attention that kind of made me laugh actually today, and I don't know why it took me so long to see it. Did you see that thing about that TV station out in Boston? They were interviewing, like, for that snowstorm and that nor'easter, and they interviewed Jerome McGinley, who spent a very brief time with the Bruins, and they didn't even know who he was.
You know, those news people are quite as, you know, up to date as the sports people. I kind of wondered, you know, when, you know, local news reporters, you know, and it happens to, you know, it's just a luck of the draw type thing, Noah, when, you know, you're airing this live and you have some sports guys, especially out east, especially in the Boston area, a very hockey heavy market, especially up there in the Northeast. When his face came to birth, they didn't just point and go, that's got to be Jerome McGinley. I mean, he's a very recognizable face. In fact, he's around Minnesota quite a bit too. I know a couple of years back, he was actually bringing in his kids to go to hockey camps here, and a couple of people passed him at the MSP airport. So he does travel around quite a bit, and still pretty funny that they didn't know it was, you know, what should be, in my opinion, is a NHL Hall of Famer.
Totally agree. I think it's kind of funny too that Jerome McGinley is in the States. I mean, he's Canadian, so it's interesting that he did end up, you know, staying in Canada. I don't believe he resides. I believe he resides actually around the Boston area, from what I've understood. So I also like with Jerome McGinley, I like how he's patented the Steve McDonald and Brett Larson haircut hybrid. Yeah, looking pretty good there. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Not as crazy as an ice surfacer starting on fire, though. I think that's probably the wildest one that we've had this year. I don't know.
That as far as hockey moments, there's been some good ones, certainly. But as far as maybe the not so top 10 moments, that might be number one was, and I think we talked about it when it happened, Noah, is that, it's not just the fact that it wanted fire, but the person driving kept on driving this thing. He had to go essentially 200 feet with this thing engulfed in flames to get it off the ice. So, you didn't just stop what you're doing and hop up, because that thing went up quick. If you see the video, it started what looked to be a pretty small one, and it expanded really quick. So the fact that he kind of held on to it and drove it off the ice was quite a decision. I don't know if he would probably do it a second time. But
so I guess before we jump into our trivia and double minor giveaway, Nick, I suppose I can give a little bit of an interesting story. Speaking of my dog, I was thinking about this as I was hiking earlier this week, because the weather has been so beautiful. It doesn't really have so much to do with my dog, but this story is 100% absolutely true. I was with my dog and my dad, and we were walking. There's a trail that goes around the lake that we live on. We live on a small lake that's surrounded by state forest land. It takes about 2 hours to kind of walk around it. It's a very peaceful walk. But we were walking one day. I must have been, maybe 7 or 8 years old. And we're walking up this trail. We get through this slough, and we're going out of the slough and up a hill. And when you get into this area, it's pretty much all trees. It's one of the few places in North Dakota that actually has a ton of trees and isn't, just plains and prairie. So we're going through this trail, and it's the middle of summer. There's a lot of brush, out there. And all of a sudden, Otter starts barking, and we turn. We're trying to figure out what he's barking at. Well, then there's this moose calf that's probably about maybe 10, 15 yards away that's walking through the trees. So we're like, oh my gosh, this is crazy. And this is before, everybody used to carry, the cell phones and the modern, phones that they used to have now. I mean, we barely had flip phones back then. So we're watching this moose walk, and I turn around, I kid you not, face to face with another moose calf, because there were two of them and we didn't know there were two of them. And I got licked on the face by a moose calf at 7 years old. And of course, anyone who knows moose knows that where there are moose calves, Mama Moose is coming back
somewhere soon.
Yeah, you better get out of there. So of course we hightailed it out of there. But I tell people this story all the time, and they're like, no way, man, there's no way that happened. Swear to God, as my dad is my witness, that legitimately happened. So I was thinking about that on my hike as I was walking the other day, because I was actually walking past the place. I mean, have you ever had anything crazy like that happen in your life, where it was like, I can't believe that just happened? Because I mean, like I said, I tell people this story all the time. They're like, no way that happened. 100%. How many people on this planet can say they've legitimately been licked by a moose in the wild?
Probably not very many that went unscathed by was probably the other thing, right? I would imagine there is. You're catching me on a Friday night at 8:11. Again, the 34-year-old brain is half asleep.
That's all right. We'll just move on to trivia.
That. How about that?
Yeah, I agree.
Let's go to trivia, and then obviously our two-line fan giveaway is this episode as well, and that's exciting. I do remember that part, so that part's good.
All right, so we'll jump into our two-line fan trivia. Every Saturday at noon, your chance to win a Huskies Warming House Podcast hat.
Two-line fan trivia is your chance to win. Follow the Huskies Warming House Podcast on Twitter at Warming House Den. A new question will be asked every week. Be the first to tweet us the correct answer. Winners will be mentioned on the show, as well as a chance for prizes and more. One question, one answer, one winner. It's two-line trivia.
Nick, this week's two-line fan trivia comes from last week's guests, a pair of guests we had in Jack Ashawn and Jimmy Schultz. Everyone but the Radical Husky was eligible this past week. And like we mentioned, Jack Ashawn, Jimmy Schultz, two of the best St. Cloud State hockey players to ever play in a Husky uniform. However, which teams did they score their first NCAA goal against? Not their first point. Which teams did they score their first ever goal against? I suppose, Nick, why don't we start I want to see if you can even take a remote stab here. I'm going to give you a hint. Both Jimmy and Jack's goals did not come against opponents in the NCHC. I'll tell you that much. And they did not come against opponents in the Big Ten. So any other opponent but that. Wild stab, Jimmy Schultz, October 16th, 2015. Who was his first goal against?
Bemidji State?
No, but you are in the right conference. Mankato. That
was my other pick.
Was Jimmy Schultz's first goal. And Jack Ashawn, barely over a year later on October 29th of 2016. I don't know if you're going to get this one. Who did he tally his first goal against?
Let's go, since that's right around the time that I usually go at East. So let's try Boston College.
So we're actually going south, very, very south, to a team that we covered quite heavily in the summer, UAH, Alabama Huntsville. So this one was kind of interesting. Tanner Heath got half of this answer and pretty much helped out his buddy Fight the Pants earn another win to tie for second place on the leaderboard. And both guys actually scored their first goal at the Herb Brooks National Hockey Center. So kind of an interesting little side note there. But Nick, that's not the only thing that we have to reward people and have a giveaway with. We also have our double minor giveaway, which normally happens in the first show of every month. But like we mentioned in last week's show, Noah Grant didn't have his poop in a group, essentially. So we're going to get to it right now. We're going to give away 2 Huskies Warming House Podcast t-shirts. Just a note from the last time, we have 3 new people that are not eligible to win a t-shirt anymore. They are at Hockey IQ Academy, aka Tony Gruba, at Gina Carlson, and at AJK Huskies, as AJK Huskies was the winner of our, essentially, who was going to score the first goal in the pod. He was one of the 2 correct answers in that. So just so you are aware of that, let's jump over to the board right now. And we have 335 names that are eligible for this one, Nick. I always like to see that list growing close to 400 followers now. So let's get right to it and pick our 2 winners. Our first winner here is going, oh my goodness, how about this one, Nick? Tyler Anderson. That's actually,
that's really funny.
That's actually pretty funny. Yeah. Well, congratulations, Tyler Anderson. Tyler Anderson, great friend of the show. Also been playing pretty well in the pod, if I might add. Always happy to. Yeah, we're going to get to that in a little bit too, I think, Nick. But congratulations, Tyler Anderson. You are a winner of a Huskies Warming House Podcast t-shirt. The other winner that we are having is at Phil23 Murray. He is our second winner. I believe his bio says something about being really good at rec hockey or something like that. So congratulations to our 2 winners here, Nick. Phil23 Murray and T_Andy8, otherwise known as Tyler Anderson. Nick, how about that? Tyler Anderson. I mean, talk about giving back to the boys a little bit here. I mean,
if it wasn't a random generator that we were recording, that people would think this was like a rigged election or something like that. So
we've never had discussions about that anywhere around us, have we?
No, not at all. So,
oh my goodness. Speaking of something that isn't rigged and has been quite a lot of fun so far is the NCHC pod. We're going to cover that as well as a multitude of other topics surrounding women's WCHA hockey and a little bit of NHL news in our CenterIceView News and Notes.
CenterIceView News and Notes. CenterIceView provides you with the best coverage of St. Cloud State Huskies hockey, from game notes, recaps, photos, and more. Go to CenterIceView.com.
And on our CenterIceView News and Notes, plenty of outside college hockey news to get to. First of all, Noah, I want to bring you into the fold here. The ECHL will be starting here soon, and a little bit of an update. The NHL has some, I guess, news and some not so news that we really need to hear. So let's first start with the leagues outside of college hockey before we bring it back into men's and women's hockey here at St. Cloud State.
Yeah, 5 topics, 5 quick little topics that we have to run through in terms of other news around the hockey world not pertaining to our St. Cloud State Huskies. Like you mentioned, the ECHL starts tonight, Friday, December 11th. 3 teams opted out earlier this week from the entire season. That would be Cincinnati, Idaho, and Kalamazoo. They actually joined the entire North Division of the ECHL: Adirondack, Brampton, Maine, Newfoundland, Reading, and Worcester. have all opted out of this year's upcoming 2020-21 season. That leaves 15 teams that are still playing in the league to start the season tonight. But interestingly enough, Nick, under the ECHL's COVID-19 policy, all players that were on these 8 teams that opted out are now free agents. So very, very interesting developments to see how teams play that. Kind of an interesting little caveat there. Speaking of caveats, the NHL is still shooting for that January 13th start date, and they submitted a tentative realignment plan for the upcoming season consisting of 4 divisions. Of course, that all anticipated Canadian division is one of those divisions. Minnesota is one of the teams that is reportedly a team that could be moving divisions from what the current setup is right now too. They haven't finalized everything. There's been a little bit of, I don't know if you want to call it uproar, but just kind of feelings from some teams that they feel like maybe a couple of those squads should shift around to make the divisions make more sense in terms of travel and things like that. And even though the border is closed between the United States and Canada, the NHL will not restrict trades between Canadian and American teams. So Canadian and American teams will not play each other in the regular season, but trades can still happen. And reportedly, NHL players and owners both have preference for MLB-style homestands during this time. And what that means is essentially, if you are playing a team within your division, say the Dallas Stars are playing the Colorado Avalanche, Colorado would go to Dallas and play 3 or 4 hockey games against Dallas within a given set. So you're seeing the same opponent repeatedly for basically the better part of a week. So Nick, I mean, do you like that MLB style homestand? Do you think it's something that the NHL should adopt beyond this season? Or do you think it should be scrapped after the season if they do in fact do it?
Well, a couple of things here, because first of all, I mean, this is the best they can do without a bubble. And I know that the NHL, they are looking for any way they can generate revenue at any point during the season. I think it's important to note that, traveling, as we all know, same thing with Josh Fenton in the NCH, he pointed out that's where you have a high risk of possibly contracting and then spreading COVID-19. So it's a multitude of different ways of reasons why you do it. Do I think it sticks past this year? I only think it sticks if you have to, honestly. I don't see this as a long-term solution. This is a Band-Aid over a problem. And just as we anticipate here in the United States, the hope of a distribution of a vaccine, I know that the leagues, the NHL is one of them, obviously. And they did mention, Noah, too, briefly, that they would be hoping to acquire a private purchase of COVID-19 vaccines if it was available. They did mention specifically that they weren't going to jump the line to do so. So if it was made available, they would certainly be looking to do so. So that would include coaching staff, that would include upper management, obviously training, equipment managers, obviously medical personnel. So it's all just trying to get over this hump that we are calling COVID-19. So it is what it is. And the good news is, if we do start to see this vaccine being distributed to a point where the NHL can allow fans, even if it is a baseball style, type homestand, if you can sell some tickets, I mean, why not? At the end of the day, I think fans are just primed to get back into an arena no matter who the opponent is.
Yeah, some of those teams, especially those teams out west, like in California, might even have trouble getting into their own buildings currently as far as the structure is concerned. And like you mentioned, the NHL bleeding money a little bit, have even considered putting advertising on player helmets similar to what they do in European countries for their types of advertising. So we'll keep you updated on that. Speaking of advertising, Nick, and some old school advertising from the 1990s, and our third quick little topic here, Disney has announced a new Mighty Ducks series reboot for a TV series that is set to be created at some point. A release date has not yet been announced. Kind of interesting that the timing almost matches the reverse retro uniforms with the Flying Duck, Nick. I don't know. I mean, that's all there is on that little tidbit, but kind of cool to think back and think that Gordon Bombay and company might make a reappearance of some sort. A TV series, though, I mean, do you think it's something that would catch on? I don't know.
Hard to say. I mean, you talk about some of those old classic movies, and I hate to say the word old and date myself, but you go back to, Mighty Ducks 1, 2, and 3. I mean, they had their own style, their own theme, and a lot of what, as viewers you attach to is not necessarily the character, but you also attach to an actor too, right? So, and I say that because, I mean, if it's not Emilio Estevez, that is coming back as Gordon Bombay, maybe a person that grew up watching that may not be interested in it, that kind of thing. So I think the idea is great. I mean, it's hockey advertising in a nutshell, and it has to happen. So that I'm okay with. Whether, the viewing audience is intended will catch on to it. I mean, we probably have to see an episode or two to really know how they're going to play this out. But either way, I'm happy that something revolving hockey in the United States is getting to go at another TV series.
Yeah, we've seen it go both ways. Some of the Slapshot remakes were kind of a bust too. So we've seen it go on the negative side too. Just don't get caught for 2 minutes for roping. Speaking of a guy that probably wouldn't make that call here, Nick, Hall of Fame linesman Neil Armstrong, who is the father of Blues general manager Doug Armstrong, did pass away at 87 years old this week. He officiated over 1,700 NHL games and later became a scout for a couple of teams, including the Montreal Canadiens. So our condolences to the Armstrong family. And our last note before we get into some college hockey news, Nick, revolves around the great one. A Wayne Gretzky rookie card, 1979 OPC Gem Mint rookie card, has sold today for $1.29 million. Kind of crazy. There are only 2 of these cards to be of gem mint quality in the world regarding Wayne Gretzky, and it is the first ever hockey card to surpass $1 million and the 6th highest trading card sale of all time, sitting behind LeBron James, Giannis Antetokounmpo, Mickey Mantle, Honus Wagner, and Mike Trout, who leads the leaderboard at a $3.9 million value for his 2009 card. Nick, I've actually kind of read an article too, speaking of COVID, where a lot of people have gotten back, especially in the hockey world, back into trading cards and hockey trading cards. I'm not going to lie. When I was a kid, I used to be kind of into it. Used to go to the store, in the early 2000s, and they used to come in the packs of like, you could get the single packs or the ones like the 3-deck packs, essentially. I still have a couple binders of them, probably stuff somewhere in my house. Were you ever a big card collector or know people that are?
Yeah, I was actually. Back in the day, I definitely had my upper deck cards for sure. I had quite a bit of them actually. And it's funny that, as a kid, it's trading cards, right? It doesn't really have a significant monetary value. You're looking at the back for stats, and it's the look in the picture, and you're trying to collect the entire team. And then you see news like today where Wayne Gretzky's a specific gem quality card is selling for $1 million and change. And I did ask you if that was U.S. or Canadian. You did confirm U.S. And, if we don't know who the buyer was, maybe it was a Canadian exchange one. And if it was Canadian, probably that's north of close to $2 million Canadian funds. That's a pretty insane amount of money to spend on a trading card. But for the great one, I can only imagine that it's up there. I would imagine, I don't know if you would agree with me on this, short little tangent, that Alex Ovechkin, if he does actually get close to his record, maybe even eclipses it, he might be able to challenge him in some time if someone keeps a rookie card for him, maybe for that price point. So that's just my thoughts on that. But yeah, I had a lot of trading cards as a kid. Unfortunately, I don't think I still have them anymore.
Yeah, I definitely totally agree with you that I think that Alex Ovechkin's card could catch a fair price if you do happen to have one in mint condition that happens to be from his rookie year or something like that. I remember, that was kind of the prime of when I was a young kid. So Alex Ovechkin, Sidney Crosby, those are the big cards to get and see if you could find them in any sort of pack. So I probably have about 5 or 6 of not rookie cards, but just general Alex Ovechkin cards sitting around in a binder somewhere. So yeah. I kind of miss it, and I think it's fun to look back a little bit and see, look back in the binders and think like, why do I have this card? I probably have about 10 copies of Henrik and Daniel Sedin too, because once you found one, you had to try to find the other one to try to match it up. So yeah, that's a lot of money though, Nick. If anyone wants to loan the Huskies Warming House podcast that same amount of $1.29 million, we're not going to complain. But what are we here for, Nick? We're here mainly to talk about St. Cloud State hockey and the meat and potatoes of this segment, and something we're really excited to talk about, women's hockey. St. Cloud State currently sitting 4th in the WCHA with a 2-3-1 record, technically tied for 2nd if you want to go by just points alone. But of course, there's games played and a number of varying factors that do come into account there. The last time St. Cloud State had 2 conference wins in a season, especially last year, did not come until Valentine's Day weekend, the last week of the regular season. So that tells you right away how much better this St. Cloud State team has gone off to a roll. They're putting the puck in the net, and really exciting to see this group really take shape here. They trail Minnesota and Duluth. They are tied with Ohio State in the standings and lead Bemidji, Wisconsin, and Minnesota State Mankato. A couple of other statistics to kind of throw around here, Nick. They're 0 for 18 on the power play, but 18 for 19 on the kill, so special teams has not been too much of an issue. Something that we did see a little bit last year with a penalty kill that was south of 70 or 80%, I should say, in the high 70s. They had a tough weekend, though. From when we talked last weekend, they were outscored by a combined score of 9-1 in Duluth, but they did bounce back Thursday and today with an overtime win yesterday, and they split today with an overtime loss. Today, they were up in Bemidji at the Sanford Center. Yanina Newland does lead the team with 5 points in 6 games. To put that in perspective, Nick, she had 13 total points in 30 games last season. So she is almost halfway to her total point total from last year. Very impressive for the Finn. Freshman Emma Gentry scored the overtime winner yesterday and has a point in all 3 of the games she's played. And Clara Himlarova, Taylor Lind, and Olivia Savar, all sophomores, round out the top 5 in points. And both goaltenders, Emma Paluzny and Sonia Hola, have a better than a 9-2 save percentage entering their next contest, which will not be until the spring, as they just completed the first half of their season before Christmas break. And we do have Emma Paluzny coming on the show next week, too. So lots to break down there, Nick. I got to say, I mean, I got a chance to take in the game a little bit when I was at work today. Unfortunately, like we mentioned, they did lose to Bemidji in overtime, but I tell you what, I mean, there are some players on this team that can just flat out play, and I have just been really impressed with this group. Is there anything that stood out to you that you've really liked about this group, or something that I don't know if it is really a surprise for you, but something that you hope to see and has ended up transpiring so far?
Yes, just playing with more speed, just through all the different zones. If there's one major complaint I had, especially in the offensive zone, was it just looked like, and granted, part of that was they were defending so much, they were just tired. I just think that, number one, they look faster. I saw the goal of the overtime winner with Emma Gentry. Great play there on the setup there. I believe that was Himlarova that was on the setup for Emma Gentry's great between the wickets 5-hole game-winning goal there in overtime. And it just very crisp passing. Everything was done with a purpose. It almost looked like there was no confidence there last year. They seem like a team that's believing in themselves. And we were talking on a couple of different episodes that this team is due, if they can get together, play cohesive. This is a team that will surprise people. We're seeing that. And it's almost too bad, Noah, that we're having this first half, second half season, because, a split against Bemidji, I think, you talk about a measuring stick. Mm-hmm. I think, this weekend we'll try to show that they could compete with some of the top teams in the WCHA. They showed it this weekend, and 2 overtime splits, 1 win, 1 loss. But for me, what's most important is when you have those good outings, right? Whether it's a win or a loss, they're close, good games. You want to keep playing. You want to keep improving. And we don't know when they might be back. It could be end of January. It could be February again. There's some tentative dates that we have gotten, although nothing has been secured as of yet. So we're hoping, and I'm sure the girls they're hoping to get back in the ice in competitive play sometime soon. But it's just too bad that, they have to stop now, because if you're Steve McDonald, Janelle Sergey, and the rest of the coaching staff, you want to keep playing. And I think the girls too want to keep the momentum and try to keep improving every week.
I absolutely agree. As you mentioned, too, a couple teams have had hiccups. This was Bemidji's first series of the entire season. Of course, they were slated to play the Huskies back when the Huskies had their own COVID scare earlier in the year. And then you talk about teams like Wisconsin, who pretty much postponed play through their Christmas break as far as the women's side was concerned. So, ups and downs, kind of a weird schedule and standings brouhaha, if you will, just because of the variance in terms of scheduling. But that's just 2020 for you. I gotta say, Nick, and I just noticed this even more today. It was something that I kind of had in the back of my head, and I'm glad you mentioned a measuring stick as far as Bemidji State was concerned, because we didn't know how they were going to respond after a tough weekend in Duluth. Duluth, arguably, right now they're tied with Minnesota for being the best team in the WCHA. They're a good hockey team. But one player for the Huskies that has really stood out to me, as good as Yanina Newland has played, Taylor Lind, to me right now, I've really liked the way that she's played. And the reason I say that, and I don't mean this in a condescending way. Last year, she had a very, very good freshman year, but I thought that there were times that when she had the puck, I thought that she maybe didn't play with enough poise. I don't know if she kind of believed in her own ability a little bit. Man, I watched her, especially today in that game against Bemidji. There was a play where there were 3 Bemidji players around her, and she had the puck pinned up in the corner where they were killing off a 5-on-3. Just the way that she's played the game this year, you can tell she's a player, as well as many other sophomores in this group. They just continue to grow and develop and be so confident with the puck. They are going to be such a deadly unit when it comes to their senior year in a Huskies uniform as they continue to grow. But for me, I mean, she's been really impressive. Olivia Savar, obviously in the top 5 as well, and she's been really impressive too. I'm just really, I mean, I can't even begin to put into words, I think, especially you and I, but especially myself, not to point it at me, but covering this women's hockey team and seeing the struggles that they did, just not being able to get over the hump last year, and seeing them finally put together all of those things that we listen to Steve and Janelle and Molly talk about every week. It's just so satisfying. So I really hope this season gets going right away in January, because like you mentioned, it's a long time to wait to see this women's hockey group that really has a lot of potential. Moving into hockey that we are going to see quite a bit of before Christmas break, that's the men's hockey team, the only other one in St. Cloud. St. Cloud State is, did you like that?
I did. Just for clarification too. Yeah, the only other one. That's great.
Yeah, well, hey, I mean, we should probably cover some St. John stuff too one of these days. Who knows?
We probably should, actually.
But St. Cloud State is 3rd in the NCHC in their respective standings, and I believe they were ranked 13th in the nation at Showtime when I had last look. They're 3-1-0, and they trail Minnesota Duluth and North Dakota, but both of those teams each have a game in hand on the Huskies. Huskies getting set to play Saturday, December 12th against North Dakota. Omaha and Denver are kind of the next 2 teams that are in the mix in those standings, followed by Western Michigan and Miami kind of in the bottom tier. And then a Colorado College team that we really haven't seen a whole lot of yet. They're playing tonight against Western Michigan. So they haven't been the strongest team thus far, but again, we've only seen a small sample size from them. Since we talked on the show last week, Nick, the Huskies were 1-0 after that late 3rd period thriller versus Western Michigan. To recap the week since then, they won a 1-goal nail-biter on Saturday versus Denver and took care of Omaha in a fairly tight game with Jackson Castor in net on Sunday. And then they came out really, really flat in a 2-1 loss against Western Michigan on Wednesday, the second time around. Yami Kranola, Sam Henches, Nick Perbix, Kevin Fitzgerald, and VT Miettinen round out the top 5 in points. All have 3 points on the ledger. Take this one into perspective, though, Nick. The defensive core for the Huskies, 11 points in 4 games. So you really got to like that from the back end if you're Dave Shayak and Nick Oliver as assistant coaches running those kind of particulars there. David Rennick owns a .910 save percentage after 3 contests. Jackson Castor, like we mentioned, did his job against Omaha. And every Husky has seen the ice besides netminder Joey Lamoureux to this point in the pod. Nick, we were really riding high on the St. Cloud State men's team. And then Wednesday rolled around and Twitter blew up. The fans were not happy. Anarchy was happening. I didn't know if we were going to have a Vancouver Gave Semin riot down here in the States.
The zombie apocalypse was happening.
Yeah. I mean, Nick, put this in perspective for fans. I mean, what do you like from the Huskies so far? Are the fans' concerns warranted? Do we got to relax a little bit? How are you feeling about this group after 4 hockey games here?
First of all, breathe. Honestly, breathe. But first of all, we talked about this in our preview and our game recap just the other couple of days ago. And it's important to note that Western Michigan and St. Cloud, that game was incredibly wide open, right? And Brett Lusson talked about trying to use the defense to try to essentially transition the play north to south even quicker. And he wanted to anticipate, which means they were using stretch passes. And there were plenty of times where they were catching Western Michigan sleeping, right? Well, Andy Murray is a former NHL head coach. It's a very easy to go back, look at the film and go, okay, this team plays with their strength, which is speed. The only way we can do that is we have to clog the neutral zone. We got to clog their long passes. We take that away, we slow them down a little bit, and maybe we take them out that way. And that's exactly what Western Michigan did. Now, the good news is for Huskies fans is that you can usually make adjustments back the other way, right? You bring up all 5 players as a unit against shorter passes, maybe stretch the ice a little bit. So there's a couple of things you can do. Now, on the flip side, you talk about energy, and we talk about how they came out flat, right? Again, the Huskies' goal against Western Michigan was essentially, if you want to call it garbage time, it was less than, I think, 19 seconds left by Nick Perbix. A good shot through a screen, but nonetheless too little too late. But Huskies fans need to relax, right? They're 3-1. So they're sitting good. And I think, if anything, if you're going to lose a game, you lose the one before you play North Dakota, because now you're kind of ticked off at yourself as a player. It's probably a game maybe in your head you thought you maybe should have had. Again, Western Michigan, we know that they've had struggles against goaltending. I think maybe that's where most of the anxiety from fans is coming from, is the 2 games prior, they lost, 8-2, then 9-1 or something like that. I mean, they were getting blown out of the building.
Outscored 18-4 combined within 2 games, 10-2 and 8-2.
Right. So, and unfortunately for Huskies fans, they have to understand that they hadn't played those other teams yet. Yes, could you argue that St. Cloud State should have been, more on the aggressive side in that? And I would agree with that. But Andy Murray and Western Michigan really did a good job defensively, especially on the forecheck. They had 2 guys on both defenses. They were really making the breakout difficult. The middle of the ice was clogged up. And unfortunately for St. Cloud, one thing they didn't do well was chip the puck and retrieve it, right? When they did finally get into the zone, they were looking to carry it in. I understand that. And there was only a handful of times, I was obviously calling the game, not a lot of sustained zone time. It was a lot of rush plays, no forecheck, no cycle play. So unfortunately, it played right into Western Michigan's game plan, and they just weren't able really to adjust, in my opinion. So good news is that you're winning still, in theory, the 5-on-5 battle. If you're going to have a weakness, I know the power play has not clicked yet, but I'd rather have the 5-on-5 advantage now and let the power play catch up. You don't want to rely on special teams to provide your offense, because then, especially for the Huskies, I mean, yes, taking way too many penalties, that doesn't help. But I'd rather have them generate offense at 5-on-5 than, again, on the man advantage. So there's still a lot of positives here. David Rennick has looked good. I know there's been maybe a couple of questionable goals. We've talked about it. We've put that to bed. But overall, from front to back, this team is playing well, and they're going to be tested. Again, number 1 team in the nation with North Dakota, again, tomorrow afternoon. It's a matinee game. And with a loss before then, I just hope it provides them some emotional energy, and they've had 2 days rest. So, I mean, you can't ask for a better setup, and it's going to be a really good game between the 2 clubs.
I'm really glad you kind of brought up about the play styles, and a very textbook game by Western Michigan. And we talked about it in our recap as well, or our breakdown, I should say. This Western Michigan group wasn't going to keel over, and they're not a team that's going to lose by the margins that they did in the previous 2 games. I mean, that's just not going to happen. Like we talked about, Brandon Busey or no Brandon Busey, they're going to be a better team. And Andy Murray, you expect that of a coach of that caliber. When you mentioned about puck possession time and trying to chip pucks in, it's a very good point. And I don't challenge people. I don't know why I say I challenge people. I'm not challenging you. I'm not challenging you. But I would love for fans to go back and take a look at the first game that St. Cloud State played. Very, very wide open game against Western Michigan, at least for the first period, but even closer to the tail end of that game too. And then take a look at Wednesday's game. And what do you notice about St. Cloud State? Yes, they had better legs that first night, but also every play where there's a loose puck, a 50-50 battle, there's a St. Cloud State player that's winning that foot race. And usually they're doing it with numbers. There was usually 2 guys that were swarming around on the attack there. And you saw St. Cloud State where this is the modern game of hockey, right? If you can hang on to the puck, why give it up? Why shoot the puck in? You want to enter the zone with numbers, with speed, and with puck possession. And that makes sense. And especially with a team like St. Cloud State, who's not a big team that doesn't probably want to grind out in the corners that much, you want to be a group that's going to possess the puck. But when you look at Western Michigan's defensive adjustment, we talked about kind of essentially that wall almost, where you would come in and you would have 2 Western Michigan players that would step up at the point of attack right in front of the blue line. Well, what does that mean? That means you got to chip the puck in. Otherwise, the puck's probably going to get taken away from you because you're not going to win that one-on-one move and come in with any sort of speed or numbers. It's going to be a really difficult zone entry. So what do the Huskies have to do? Well, common sense in 1980 says that you got to just rip it around the boards and try to have a dump in like that. Well, in today's day and age, it doesn't matter if it's Brandon Busey or Austin Kane in net for Western Michigan. They're going back, they're stopping that puck, they're setting up for their defenseman, or the Western Michigan defenseman is going to win that race. So it's all about soft chips. And the Huskies didn't do that enough. Just this little chip that just gets yourself around the defenseman who, when they step up, they're going to be flat-footed if you chip the puck around them. Now you've entered the zone with numbers, or they're going to take an interference penalty as you try to step by them. And the Huskies were not willing to, when they had limited possession time, chip pucks in and try to create a little 2-on-1 essentially, or a mini cycle zone entry, if you will, because they either tried to force the play by possessing the puck, or they just tried to rip it into the zone instead of a nice soft float to where a teammate could get to it. And that was an adjustment that I don't know if St. Cloud was gripping the sticks too tight or whatever it was, but that's the biggest thing for me, especially with a group like North Dakota. North Dakota is going to be a team that not only are they going to be stepping up, they're going to be taking the game like in your face. They're not stepping up for the purpose of, I think Western Michigan was kind of just holding on for dear life a little bit and just trying to stymie the offense. If North Dakota takes the puck away from you, you can be darn sure there's going to be two other guys with that person who has the puck just like that. I mean, they're such a good hockey team. So Huskies fans, like you mentioned, got to relax, but you also got to understand what both sides of it go into for St. Cloud State. There's some adjustments that St. Cloud has to do, but then there's other things that, I mean, this is the NCHC, arguably the best league in college hockey. Teams are going to make adjustments. Overall, I've liked the way that the Huskies have played. We've mentioned this before, up and down the lineup as far as freshmen to seniors. Every player basically has played well for the majority of time, except for a handful of spots on Wednesday. I've liked the production and the contribution from, again, forwards, defensemen. Goaltenders have done their job. There's a lot to look forward to with this St. Cloud State men's team if they continue to play the way that they are. So I guess I encourage fans to stay engaged. I think it's funny when, honestly, when we go on Twitter and we see people, oh, they gave him a goal. I can't bring myself to watch this Huskies team. I can't cheer for this Huskies team. Like, name me any Huskies team besides maybe the team from 2018-19 and maybe even the group before that just was so dazzling with that wow factor that they just walked all over teams. That doesn't happen in college hockey hardly anymore, especially with the parity that goes on. You're going to have ups and downs. You're going to have ebbs and flows. And what did that team 2 years ago against AIC show us? Maybe a little bit of adversity isn't the worst thing in the world. And right now the Huskies, very tough schedule in the pod, only going to continue against North Dakota, but I like their chances, Nick.
I do too. And again, you talk about rebounding, right? Responding to that loss against Western Michigan. They're going to have to, because again, North Dakota, very aggressive forechecking team. They cycle the puck. What North Dakota does so well is when they're, especially in the offensive zone, we were seeing this in their own building last year, was the second and third man support on the offensive forecheck, and then using their defensemen as almost like a fourth forward. Sometimes they play a very NHL, very aggressive style where their defensemen are so speedy with their feet and they're so smart reading the play that they can afford to pinch low because the forward's going to come back and cover. So there's always support back when, and you basically can seal every single passing option out of your zone. So it's going to be a suffocating forecheck for St. Cloud on Saturday. If we're going to do like a mini little prediction here for me, is that they have to be poised with the puck in the back end. Again, I would say shrink the ice a little bit too. You're not going to be able to stretch North Dakota for a 50 to 60 foot pass. It's going to have to be 10, 15 foot passes, come up the ice as a unit. And especially if they're going to force you to soft dump it, make sure you have support, 2 or 3 guys, flip it up into the air for that soft dump, but come and make sure you have speed when you dump it. So that way you make North Dakota's defense turn, they give up the blue line, and at least you're creating a 50-50 battle and not allowing them, like you mentioned, to do a hard bolt where they're easily going to be the first one on the puck, and then it's just a quick transition back defensively for the Huskies. That to me is going to be big. And then of course, with any good team, you have to possess the puck in the offensive zone, make them defend, and obviously, get shots on net. Adam Scheel, again, we know he's good in net between the pipes from North Dakota. So keep it simple. And again, just take what they're giving you, but don't try to force it, especially at either blue line, because North Dakota is too good. They'll make you pay for every mistake.
I believe within a week's time, if I'm not mistaken, I definitely could be. They play at least 3 games, if not 4. Is it 4? I can't remember.
I'm trying to remember. I think it's only 3.
Regardless, I would say the next 4 games that the Huskies play, I think it's imperative for them to at least be 500, if not better. I think if you're 500 or better in the next 4 games for St. Cloud State, you put yourself in a really, really good position entering the last week and a half of the pod and entering the end of the first half of the regular season. But with that, Nick, we have a player that entered the first half of her post-collegiate playing career, and a friend and colleague of ours in the media side, always smiling and always happy and energetic. Rachel Herzog joined us, of course, spent 4 seasons with the St. Cloud State women's hockey team. Last year was her senior year, and now she's in the media world for her super senior year, Nick. Yeah, I mean, what can people expect from Rachel? To me, honestly, every time I see her, just an absolute blast to be able to talk to.
Very outgoing personality. She's bubbly, incredibly intelligent, and definitely someone that has you talk about, I guess, a blooming flower, if you want to call it, for someone who and she'll tell you about this, who essentially switched majors. She was in a different one, switched to this. Not easy to do, especially the timing that she did it, and has essentially taken the baton in a relay per se and has run with it and has done an incredible job.
Yeah. Absolutely. Nick, I got to stop saying absolutely. Can we put that on record right now so people know that I have to stop doing that? Every time I think some dedicated Huskies Warming House Podcast fan, every time I say absolutely in an episode, someone tally it for me so I know how many times I do it. I think that would be a great challenge for somebody. But anyway, this one was not a challenge. This one was a lot of fun. Our friend and colleague, Rachel Herzog.
With a new guest joining every week, it's a lineup chock full of players, coaches, fans, and more. This week's special guest is the Healthy Scratch.
And welcome to this week's Healthy Scratch interview segment. Joining us today is current Husky Productions member and former St. Cloud State women's hockey defenseman, Rachel Herzog. Rachel, again, thank you so much for joining us this week.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Rachel, I want to start out a little bit by just kind of poking fun at you a little bit, just because I had the opportunity. We've talked to you a couple of different times. I actually did a segment for you on your senior video, and one of the resounding themes from you was the movie Miracle was just an absolute treachery for you. Yet, in a recent post, you had made a miracle connection for the cone. You wanted to call the Yami Karanala, the Easton Brodzinski, and the VT Mietinen line the cone headline. Tell me what in the heck is going on with that?
Well, I always hated Miracle when I was younger because my older sister started playing hockey before I did. And my dad played hockey all growing up, played in college at Augsburg University. So that was something that they connected on a different level that I hadn't gotten to yet. And so all we did was either watch Wild Games, watch Miracle on repeat. And so it was just like an irritating movie, irritating memory until I actually got myself into hockey. And then I started to appreciate the movie more. Now I could say I've seen it 100 times. I know literally every single line of the movie. But it was cool kind of relating that to the line you just mentioned with Yami, VT, and Easton, because that in that game against Omaha, they seemed to click so well, and they kind of just always were able to find each other on the ice. So that was just kind of a natural connection I made.
Let's kind of talk a little bit more too about how you got in the game of hockey. You and I actually have a personal connection that you didn't even know about until last year. Your dad and my dad actually played high school hockey together at Henry Sibley High School. But like you mentioned, hockey didn't come naturally for you like most Minnesotans who grow up on the ponds, essentially being born with hockey skates on their feet. When did you finally decide that you wanted to be a hockey player instead of a non-hockey player?
I think I decided after being around the rink all the time at my sister's games, and my dad was her coach, and he had coached for many years prior to that. And he just asked me every year if I wanted to play, and I denied him a few times. But I think the more that I was around the rink and the more I was kind of getting a feel of like, oh, maybe if I don't enjoy watching it that much, maybe I'll be having more fun playing it. So I kind of gave it a shot around 9 or 10 years old. So I got into it a little later than the average Minnesotan, like you would say, who starts skating at 2 or 3 years old, which is beyond me. Crazy to think a 2-year-old can skate. I don't know. But I had learned to skate before that because my oldest house, we had a pond out in our backyard. So I had learned how to skate before. I just had never gotten into hockey. So skating was my strongest suit when I got into hockey around 9 or 10 years old. I just still didn't know how to stop. That was a gong show. Could not do that for the life of me. I would run into the boards to stop. But funny story, funny story. My coach, my first year of hockey, because I didn't know how to stop, he's like, all right, Rachel, do you have a hallway in your house? And I was like, yeah. And he's like, is it hardwood? And I said, yes, of course. He's like, okay, you're going to run up and down your hallway in your socks, and you're going to slide your feet at the end to kind of get like the stopping motion down. So then I was running up and down my hallway, back and forth, sliding my feet to kind of get that stopping motion down. And that therefore translated onto the ice. And that's officially how I learned how to stop on hockey skates, which is one of my favorite memories. And I joke about it with that coach all the time.
I don't think Nick and I still know how to stop, and we've been doing this for over 20 years. Hockey's a struggle for us, I think, sometimes. But speaking of stopping, you stopped your high school career with 31 points in your final 2 seasons as a Hill Murray pioneer, winning your way to a couple of high school state championships. The first year, you guys were kind of underdogs, and the second year, maybe not so much. But can you kind of talk about your high school days at Hill Murray, winning those state championships, and then going from that first championship to the second championship, like I just mentioned, you were underdogs the first year. Was the second year almost harder because you're not going in as wide-eyed as you did in the first year, or were they both equally challenging?
Well, kind of going back to your first couple questions, I had an amazing career at Hill Murray. All around, just the school in general was a great experience, great people, got a really good education there as well. So I overall really enjoyed my experience there, but I think the team chemistry that we had all 4 years in my career there, it was a really tight-knit group, and we were together all the time. And I think that translated a lot onto the ice as well. I would say that we spent a lot more time together than the average team in high school. And it just being a smaller school in general, you're just around each other a lot more often. I mean, and my graduating class was 120, so not a big school at all. So we were always around each other, had a lot of classes together. But yeah, going to my sophomore year when we won our first state championship, I mean, our freshman year, we got second place. So we were kind of nipping at the heels on that year and ready to kind of go for it my sophomore year. But we were definitely the underdogs. I think we were ranked 5th or 6th out of 8 that year. So we were definitely kind of coming up on the back end and kind of made a good run toward the end. So every game in the state tournament was kind of like, oh, all right, we got game 1 under our belt. And then the semifinal game was like, oh my gosh, okay, we're in the state final. And I remember my favorite memory from that was my head coach hadn't won a state championship yet. And he had a bunch of little mini water bottles. And I remember going out in the hallway to like take a breather or something in the intermission, and he's like guzzling these tiny water bottles because he's just like panicking, like freaking out. Like it was so close, and we were all feeling that energy. And the feeling after we won that first state championship was surreal. I definitely think that experience was better than winning it the second time, which you would think, I don't know if that would be a normal feeling, but definitely coming from behind, and we beat Benilde, who was a top ranked team. That was just a really encouraging feeling, and they had a lot of Division I commits at the time. So I don't know, for me personally, it was really cool because I had just started my kind of like college pursuit at that point, and kind of looking up to those top tier players and being like, wow, okay, she's going to the Gophers. Okay, she's going to Wisconsin, Penn State, and like, we can play with those kinds of players. So it kind of gave me self-motivation too, to be like, okay, well, if I can play against these players, it kind of like propelled my hopes and dreams for going to college. But that second year, definitely we were more of a powerhouse team. And going into the state tournament, we had a lot more confidence knowing that, and kind of already having that full state tournament experience. We weren't so like nervous and wound up. I think we just like had more poise and control over what we were going through, and winning it the second time was obviously amazing too. But definitely that first experience was one that I will literally never forget.
Rachel, you mentioned about being awestruck with some of the talent, and I remember talking to your dad, Mark, about your entrance into the world of hockey. Again, kind of a late bloomer, as someone would call it. 8 to 9 years old, he started skating, but it was being awestruck. It was actually watching one particular player that he mentioned by name, a future Olympian, that really almost kind of propelled you also to initially get into the game of hockey. Can you talk to us a little bit about watching this person skate and why this person inspired you to almost kind of put you on top to actually try hockey out for the first time?
Yeah, so that player was Hannah Brandt, and she went to Hill Murray, and I was at the time of my life, so I was in 8th grade at a public middle school in my area. And my dad, that was kind of when I kind of was figuring out like, oh, okay, like I'm okay at hockey, like this and that, whatever. But the public school I would have went to was Tartan. And I had just switched from my private elementary school to middle school. So I had already developed all these new friendships, and all of those same people were going to be going to Tartan. So I was pretty set on going to Tartan because I was like, I don't want to leave and make new friends again. Like I'd rather just go with my friends, whatever, like, cause hockey wasn't still really in the forefront of my mind yet. It was still just, okay, something I did in the summers, and just like how I played soccer, I did soccer fall, winter, spring, kind of all year round. So it wasn't any different. I didn't focus on it any more than I did soccer at the time. But I think he focused more on my future potential for hockey, and he wanted me to go to Hill Murray, which is a more elite school. And so he kind of put that in my brain, and I was like, I don't want to go there. And he finally took me to a Hill Murray hockey game. And that was Hannah Brandt's senior year, I believe. So I was in 8th grade, she was a senior, so I never got a chance to play with her. But I remember just being, like you said, starstruck by her because she was just so unbelievably talented. I think at that point in my career too, I was still a forward. So watching her play, I think she got 4 goals that game. And I was like, oh my gosh, I want to be Hannah Brandt. I want to go to this school. They developed her to be the player that she is. Like, if these are the players they're producing, I want to be that. And I remember that was initially when I asked my dad, okay, I want a shooting tarp in my basement. I need to shoot pucks every day. I need to stick handle every single day. I need like one of those weight things where you like stick your wrists out and you roll up the weight. Like, I need to get strong. Like, how do I be like her? So I think she was just like the first player that I saw like with my own eyes. Like, obviously, yes, I watched NHL players. I watched Miracle over and over and over again. But like, this was the first tangible person that was a girl and went to a school that was a possibility for me, where it kind of allowed me to relate to it a lot more and see like the actual potential of getting to that point. And then I followed her along as she went to the University of Minnesota as well, became an All-American there, and then an Olympian. So she was always somebody that I looked up to, but she was definitely my first hockey inspiration.
Those wrist rollers are an absolute killer, let me tell you.
Oh, they're horrible.
They are.
I didn't even have a weight for it. Like, we didn't have weights in our house. So I literally filled up 2 milk jugs with water and tied them to a hockey stick. And that's what I would roll up.
Yeah, we so when I was a kid, we had one of those little just the little 5-pound weights that you have, the little circle ones, and but we didn't have any strings, so we just used like shoelaces, and we just tied a shoelace onto like a wooden dowel and did that. But obviously it didn't get me anywhere because I don't play hockey anymore. But speaking of the Gophers and a rival of the Gophers, Rachel, a player that you played with that ended up on the Wisconsin Badgers was your D partner in high school. That was Mackenzie Steffen. Can you kind of talk a little bit about what kind of influence she had on you as well? When you talk about you were at that age where you didn't quite know that hockey was going to be at the forefront of your mind, and then you develop as you continue through high school. I mean, what influence did she have to kind of let you know that, yeah, I can play hockey at an elite level and be really good at this?
Yeah, so she actually came into Hill Murray as a sophomore. So I had already been on the Hill Murray team as a freshman, and she kind of joined the team a little bit later than normal. And I remember the first experience that I had with her was in school, and I met her and she was crying at her locker. And I was like, are you okay? And she was like really stressed out because she was trying to decide whether she should commit to either UMD or Wisconsin. And I'm like, you're 15. Like, how are you making this decision already? And like, this was before I even had done any college visits, like looked at anything, like even had thought about college yet. And she was feeling the weight of trying to decide where she wanted to go to school. And I was like, oh my God, this girl must be really good. Like, I don't know. But yeah, she was definitely a force to be reckoned with in high school. She was a very, very dominant defenseman, very offensive, powerful. She was really strong. And we actually laughed about it because we had played with each other once before in a Minnesota Selects hockey tournament. And we didn't really remember it at the time. And then once we reconnected in high school, we were like, oh my gosh, we were on the same team. And now that I think about it, she was amazing then too, but I didn't make the connection until I was back in high school. But being able to play with her, and then eventually throughout the summers too, we played on the same Minnesota Whitecaps team, the junior Whitecaps, and we played together then too. So being able to compare myself to her or grow through her and her talents, and she respected me as a player too, and we fed off each other really well. I just think I learned a lot from her, and she was also very, very humble as well. Like, she didn't talk about herself, she didn't think too highly of herself, never had a big head, but definitely was very talented very early on in her hockey career.
And to kind of wrap up a little bit of high school questions for you, I believe you played in a couple of what you would call, I guess, winter classics of some sort, some outdoor games, essentially. Can you kind of talk about those experiences too? Because I personally have never played in an outdoor game. Nick, I don't know if you have. They're becoming a little more popular, but you got to think back, this is a fair amount of time ago before, outdoor games at the youth level were more popular. So can you kind of run us through what those experiences were like as well?
We never actually played in outdoor games in high school, but we had a tournament that we played in every year called the Winter Classic.
There you go. That's what it was.
Yeah, we played in South St. Paul. And so it was a tournament with a couple of the teams in our league or our conference, but also some single A and double A teams from outside of our conference as well. So that was just something that we participated in every year. And that was a really fun tournament just because it kind of separated you from just the basic conference play. It kind of was like that breakup between, okay, the first half of your season, and then you had the tournament, and then you kind of had the second half leading into conference play, section play, and then hopefully the state tournament. So it was a good little change up.
Well, you had to walk through the parking lot. You had to be outside at some point, right? That's an outdoor tournament, isn't it?
Yes, right. Dead in the winter. You get out of the rink and it's even colder outside. The best feeling ever.
It's funny, Richie, you look back and, you're not playing anymore, and it's a sad thought, but, now that you're not playing, I mean, I certainly look back, and mind you, my records of playing are on hieroglyphics, and we're still trying to translate those at the moment. But at the end of it, I mean, it's those weekend tournaments or holiday tournaments that you kind of look back and you go, man, those are so much fun, whether it's, the mini sticks or the knee hockey and the hotel hallways or the times at the pool. I guess, looking back on your youth career, some of those weekend tournaments or holiday tournaments, sometimes are your best hockey memories moving forward.
Oh, for sure. I was the girl that always wanted to be swimming. Let me tell you, I was a fish until I was about 17 years old. Like, I always loved swimming. I was always trying to get my teammates to come swimming with me. But if nobody wanted to be with me, I was in the pool by myself. Okay. So that was the highlight of my youth hockey tournaments for sure. And also running in the hallways in hotels. Come on. You're like flying. You're like Dash from The Incredibles. Like, it's a whole new energy in those hallways. I don't know what it is, but I think it might be the patterns that are on the carpet in there. I don't know, but it makes you feel like you're 10 times faster than you actually are. So I definitely had a lot of energy as a kid.
Was it the swimming pool, or, you said you were a fish until 17. Did it kind of morph to the hot tub, or then what changed, as Rachel got older?
Probably the metabolism kind of dropping down a little bit. At some point you're just going to have to grow out of it.
Speaking of metabolism, Rachel, I got a chance to catch up with you around this time about a year ago, and you had mentioned to me that you love sushi, but you didn't get to cook it as much because you had just gone on a vegan diet. You love to cook as well. Has the pandemic changed that at all, or is the vegan diet still going strong?
The vegan diet is still going strong, but when the interview happened last year, I was really dead strong into not cheating ever, but I let myself cheat when it comes to sushi because it's my favorite food. And I actually just had it tonight. We made it homemade as a family. So that's the one area where I'll let myself have fish for sure. But other than that, yes, I am still standing strong with the vegan diet.
So if you were to sell somebody on the vegan diet, like if Nick Maxon walks up to you and says, Rachel, I'm thinking about going vegan, what can you tell me? What are the pros and cons? What would you tell them? What would you tell our listeners? Why should we go vegan?
Well, I initially went vegan because I was a vegetarian before, and my coaches last year, 2 of them were vegan. And so they kind of told me the pros and cons for athletes, inflammation, bloating, recovery time. Those were really big things that were pertaining to me at that point in my life. But I definitely feel like after doing it for about a year now, I naturally have more energy. That's a really big thing. Just feeling naturally clean. Your just like digestive system is just really natural, I guess. And you never are feeling sick or like heavy after you eat, you know, like say Thanksgiving, when you're just like sitting on the couch, you got to unbutton your pants. Like you never feel that way. So it's just overall just like really knowing that you're putting good things in your body all the time and being able to do that every day. And it's kind of a good feeling to know that like you can cut those things out and not miss them. That's a really big thing, because I thought it was going to be really hard for me to cut out ranch dressing. Oh my God, that was like impossible for me at the time. I was like, I can't not have ranch dressing. But now I don't really think about it anymore, just because you go through the motions and eventually it just becomes habit, and it's things that you don't end up missing. So it's kind of a good like self-discipline type thing too.
It sounds like a pretty good medical analysis from you. And I bring that up only for one specific point here. Year in year, what would you call it? I guess your super senior year, essentially doing a lot of good work in the media world. But listed in your player bio originally,
Still there.
And I quote, intends on majoring at pre-med at St. Cloud State. Rachel Herzog, I don't know if anyone's known this by now. She does the WCHA Weekly Roundup. She is not a pre-med major. She does media. So like you mentioned, you have family in med school as well. What happened, Rachel?
You know, I was trying to follow along in my older sister's footsteps. I, in high school, really enjoyed anatomy classes, chemistry, math. Those were my strong suits and things that I took interest in. So that was all that I really knew going into college. And so that's what I intended for. But then I realized how social I am. And I need to be around people all the time. I thrive off of other people's energy. It's just how I operate through everyday life. And when I was going to class and sitting in lecture halls by myself, taking notes, leaving class, going to hockey, and then going to the library by myself for hours on end, I was like, I am literally never around anyone. And so it wasn't that I thought it was too hard or too much work. I just felt like it wasn't something that was natural for me. I had more to give in different realms of my personality and what I felt like I needed to make me happy. So that's kind of why I changed routes after sophomore year into the media broadcasting world.
Rachel, to follow up on that, you know, obviously you were playing and going to school for a couple of seasons, and now your playing career is over. So has it changed a little bit for you now that you're only able to really experience the game from a media perspective? And I guess, has your viewpoint of the game, and do you miss it? Do you miss going back on the ice and having that competitive edge?
I definitely, in some aspects, miss playing hockey. I think I more miss once again, being around my teammates and being around the coaches and having just that time where you're with people for 4 or 5 hours out of the day. That was kind of the highlight for me going to the rink every day, is being around my friends and being able to play hockey with my friends. And I think that's what kind of drove my love for hockey, just because it allowed me to meet so many new people. I mean, the hockey world, everybody always says it's so small, but you know people from all over the place. And I think being able to play in the summers in high school and playing on a bunch of different teams, and then going to college and meeting the teams that you play against in the hotels and stuff, I think the biggest thing that I miss the most isn't necessarily playing hockey, but the things that come from being a part of the sport. But yeah, from time to time, I am a very, very competitive person. So even when I'm watching hockey, I'm screaming at my TV because I get worked up about the tiniest little things. But I definitely appreciate being able to still be around the sport by being on the other end and appreciating it from a different perspective, for sure.
Speaking about screaming at the TV, Rachel, we talked to you a little bit what a transition, right? We talked to you pre-show about kind of the toll that it's taken in different realms of our lives as far as the pandemic is concerned. And one of those things that you had mentioned was you might be screaming at your TV occasionally because you've been cooped up so much and you're a very social person. What have you done to keep busy during this essentially COVID summer and COVID fall? We mentioned the WCHA Roundup. I believe is it your third year doing that?
Second year.
But
yeah.
It's been kind of a very awkward transition just because of the state of the WCHA. How have you been able to keep busy and keep yourself mentally sane, if you will?
I'm obviously in a couple more shows with Husky Productions and in athletics with SCSU, but I definitely come to and from school a lot. I only live an hour away. So I come home and visit my parents because they are empty nesters. So I know they miss me.
Free food.
And free food. Don't have to buy groceries. Come home and mooch off your parents. That's what you're supposed to do until you absolutely need to get off their back. But my younger sisters are here too. But hobbies wise, I really, really like to cook, and I like to paint a lot as well. That was something that I kind of lost touch with a little bit. But in the recent past, I've been getting myself back into that kind of as a time passer, I should say. And yeah, I mean, there's not a whole lot to do up in St. Cloud right now with not playing hockey and everything being online and hockey finally getting started for the media side. So things are just starting to pick up. But yes, there was definitely a lull moment.
Is there speaking of painting, because I also love to paint and draw as well, is there a certain, are you a canvas painter, watercolor painter, and like, what do you like to paint? Are there particular things? Like for me, I usually draw a lot of hockey players and old trucks because I don't know, that's just my childhood. So is there anything specific that Rachel Herzog is painting?
I definitely stick to canvas painting. I have a bunch of them hanging up in my college room. And I think I started with a painting of a lion, and that was a while ago. And you can kind of see the evolution of my progress from painting, from the first one to the last one I did. But I have a bunch of different like colorful animals up on my wall. But then I did a huge one this past summer of Tony Stark. Ooh. Because rest in peace. Love him. But I did this huge shrine of him. And so I think it's like 3 or 4 feet tall. And that took like 50 something hours, and I did it in 3 days. So I'm kind of, when it comes to painting, I'm like, all right, if I'm going to start, I'm not stopping until I'm done, because I know if I stop, I won't start again. So I just need to get it done.
Is Marvel better than DC, and is Iron Man your favorite character? Because for me, Iron Man was my favorite character growing up. Do you have a favorite superhero? I mean, what are we talking
Iron Man.
About?
I love him. Yes, he has definitely been my favorite ever since the beginning. I have a huge appreciation for all of them, but I'm just a very big Marvel geek in general. But I think he's my original favorite superhero and always will be.
I think the cool thing about Iron Man that I always liked as a kid anyway was the fact that everyone else is kind of trying to hide their identity, and he's just like, no, I'm Iron Man, and you still can't do anything about it. That's what I always loved about Iron Man. But speaking of a role that you're going to keep doing and no one's going to tell you any different is the WCHA Roundup that we've mentioned a couple of times. You're getting to the tail end of that, but like we mentioned, you've been doing it for a while. What has that experience kind of given you? How did that first come about? And what is expected through the rest of the year for the WCHA Roundup?
Well, I got the opportunity presented to me last year as a senior and also playing in the WCHA, and being a media student, they kind of seize the opportunity of having the experience of having somebody on camera that also plays in the games as well. So has kind of a different perspective than just somebody coming in and recapping the games just by watching them on the weekend. So it gave me more of an opportunity to learn more of like the behind the scenes type of media rather than just being on the front of the camera. But it was also a cool experience for me to kind of report back on the league that I actually play in as well. But now it's a little bit different now that I'm not playing. And with COVID restrictions, it's looking a little bit differently. But all in all, it's been a good experience. And I appreciate everybody that works over there. They treat me really well and give me a lot of flexibility to do what I want to do with the videos. So I appreciate that a lot as well.
Rachel, just a couple more questions. I only have one just for me. And again, thank you for joining us. As a media student, again, you're doing a whole bunch of things right now related to hockey, but has Rachel Herzog thought about what her future might look like in the media industry? Is there a particular position that, screams that this is what I want to do? Or is it still kind of up in the air? You're trying to figure out maybe a long-term career path that you might want to proceed with?
I'm really trying to keep my mind open. I still think I have a lot to learn, and I'm open to learning a lot more. And especially because I joined the major late, I've only had 2 years of experience so far. This is my third. So I still feel like I'm a little bit behind the 8 ball compared to a lot of the people that I'm working with, but I think that gives me more motivation to continue to get better and push myself harder. career-wise, like I said, I was trying to keep my mind open, but I definitely want to work in hockey or with a hockey team specifically. I don't really have any interest in being like a sports anchor for a news station. I'd rather specifically work for a particular team and follow that team throughout the season. That would be a personal goal, whether it's an ice side reporting job or an in-studio kind of recapping highlights type thing. But I'm trying not to be too close-minded because I definitely know it's a hard industry to get yourself into, and there's definitely some stepping stones that need to be taken to get where you potentially want to be. So I don't want to be too closed off on any potential ideas that could come my way.
And to follow up on that quickly, Rachel, if all 32 teams, which would be 32 coming up this summer with Seattle entering the frame, as indicated there with Noah's shirt, to me, it's a great logo, great name. But if all 32 teams came calling for you to be a part of their broadcast team, is there anyone particular that you might choose first? Do you have an inkling, or you're just going to take whatever you get? But I imagine you probably have a couple of teams that you would probably want to work for more than others.
I think just for nostalgic purposes, I would like to work for the Minnesota Wild. And because a lot of my family is in Minnesota, and I think just staying in Minnesota, kind of working for that home team would be really, really rewarding. But my other favorite team is the Pittsburgh Penguins. And I think it would be really cool to kind of travel out east and kind of experience life on the East Coast, because I've been stuck in the Midwest my whole life. Not that it's a bad thing. The Midwest is great, whatever, but like getting new experiences and getting out there and kind of doing life on my own. That's kind of intriguing to me as well. A little bit scary, but definitely Pittsburgh Penguins has been the other team that I grew up kind of enjoying. Sidney Crosby, oh my God, loved him. He was like my first idol in the NHL world. So I think that would probably be my second team that I definitely would take that job instantly.
I've only got a couple more questions for you, Rachel. And again, like Nick mentioned, thank you for joining us. Hockey aside, if a media job took you anywhere in the world, where would you want to end up and why? Is there a particular vacation destination you want to go? Because I as much as you love the Penguins, I can't believe your end goal is to end up in Pittsburgh.
Anywhere in the world for a job or for a vacation purpose?
Well, I suppose.
Job.
Why can't you work where you're having a vacation? I don't.
Oh no. This is actually an unpopular opinion, but I'm scared to live in a foreign country. I would never do it. I think it's very intimidating. I think I could handle myself for like a month or two, but if they speak a different language and I have no idea what's going on, that really stresses me out because I like to talk, as you can tell. So if I can't communicate with people with ease, I think that would really stress me out a lot. Not that other countries don't speak English. I'm sure a lot of them do.
Montreal, there in Canada. Blast.
Vancouver would be beautiful. I would like to work there.
Did you know that Vancouver's in another country, Rachel?
Yeah, I know. That's why I said it. It's a realization.
I'm just saying. Okay, well, maybe you will end up in Pittsburgh. Maybe I am mistaken. But speaking of Pittsburgh, on the other side of that is the Philadelphia Flyers, and one of the best to come out of St. Cloud State in Katie Emmer. Is there any particular broadcast person, broadcast team, media corporation that you really look towards to kind of emulate or really try to build your skill set off of? Is there anyone that you look to in the media world that has been a really strong influence for you?
Oh, definitely. And it is Katie Emmer. She obviously was an alum at St. Cloud State, but she was the one that kind of pushed me into the TV realm. She always hung out in our locker room lounge when she was the ice side reporter for Husky Productions. And so our team would obviously be at the games and we come in and out for intermission out of our lounge, and we would always talk with her. And I told her that I was wanting to switch my major, but I had no idea what I wanted to do. This was after realizing I absolutely hated biomed with all my life. And she was, after getting to know her a little bit more, she's like, you would do really well in media and broadcasting. And she kind of pushed me to do that. And then at that point in my life, I had absolutely no idea what any of that was. It was foreign. That never even crossed my mind. And she kind of took the time to show me around studios and kind of give me the insight on what she does and what she likes about it. And I really had no other direction to go in. So I kind of went into it blind. And she's definitely been a mentor for me. I've sent her some of my highlight reel stuff and asked for criticism or some things that I could work on, because she's definitely somebody that kind of took me under her wing and pushed me to do what I now love. So I appreciate and am so thankful that she did that for me, but also how humble she still is now with the amazing job that she has out in Philadelphia. She still keeps a very humble mind and takes the time to help me. So I appreciate that so much about her, and she's amazing at what she does. So who wouldn't look up to her?
We had Katie Emmer on for episode 21 way back in the middle of the summer, so get a chance to listen to that. My last question here for you, Rachel, and this might jog my memory, so apologies if I'm wrong. If I'm not mistaken, did you happen to do color for a TV broadcast with Nick Maxon?
I did.
And I want you to give your assessment of Mr. Maxon. Granted, this was a while ago, but what was that experience like? What is Mr. Maxon? Is he the consummate professional? Is he difficult to work with? How was that experience calling that hockey game?
Oh boy.
Honestly, that was something that I put out of my mind because I thought I was so horrible at it. And I felt like I had so much pressure on me because yes, I have the hockey background, but the people that were telling me how to do the job or whatever, I felt like was really restricting. So I felt like I was thinking way too hard and it just didn't go smoothly for me personally. But I thought he did great. I honestly don't have anything negative to say. I think I was just so focused on, okay, what are you going to say next? What are you going to say next? That, oh no.
I think you're still with us on our screen, Rachel. So I think sorry about that. I had a slight interruption. That's okay. You're still with us. I think what people don't realize too, and I've never done a TV broadcast. I've done plenty of radio broadcasts with Nick. And that's the thing that scares me, is I always tell him is I can think about what I'm going to say about the game, but it's different when you have a producer in your ear the entire night. But right. Can you kind of, I guess for a follow-up question, take us through, what that experience is like, or just in media in general, having a producer in your ear? Because we had Hannah Patrikis on in episode 29, and she actually was the other color analyst that has done a game with Nick as well. And she talked about how it was difficult, especially in the first period, to get your groove in. So, from a media perspective, can you bring listeners up to speed on what that is like, and kind of just a general, what is it like to have a producer in your ear while you're trying to talk and they say 15 seconds and you're like, 15 seconds? I don't know if I can do that.
Yeah, it's definitely a mental multitasking thing. I relate it to doing this, rubbing your stomach and patting your head, because sometimes you are talking and they're talking in your ear while you're talking. So you can't pause on what you're saying to listen to what they're saying. So it's kind of like being able to do both things at once. And I also was an in-studio host as well for a basketball game. And that was the only second time that I had that. And I was the in-studio host. And I remember speaking, doing highlights and stuff. And our director and producer were in my ear talking to me. And this was the first time I had done really anything live on camera. That was completely flustering. I couldn't handle it until the next intermission or whatever. But it's definitely a learning curve. And I'm definitely going to have to get into that again this year. So
I'm kind of impressed that you could, on command, tap your head and rub your stomach. I don't think I could do that.
Come on, give it a try.
I mean, I'm struggling a little bit here.
Yeah, you got it.
I can hardly keep up with the podcast. I mean, I know I said I was done with questions, but I do have another one because it made me think of another person that worked with you occasionally, and that would be Kirsten Kroll. And she talked about her first in-studio moment and how it was kind of a disaster for her. Have you ever had a moment like that you can think back where you froze up or something just did not go right and you just don't want to think about it ever again?
Yes, when I was in studio for basketball for the first time. Basketball is not really a sport that I'm very keen and have knowledge on. So I was already kind of thrown in the fire with that, trying to talk highlights and use basketball lingo. I had no idea what I was talking about, but I was also looking at a screen that was 25 feet away from me and the size of my laptop screen right now. So I was squinting, trying to see what numbers and players they were. And it was a disaster and I was panicking, and I eventually just stopped talking for 10 seconds because I was so flustered and things were changing on the screen that I wasn't ready for. And I remember the producer in my ear was like, "You still have 2 minutes to go." I'm like, I don't know what to say. And I remember, because it was a halftime report and it was a double header night. So we had done the women's game first and we were supposed to do the men's game after. And after that halftime, I was sitting at the desk crying. And I was like, I'm going to have to do that again in about 30 minutes. how the heck am I going to do this? And I think it was kind of the same thing with the color commentating with Nick, where I was trying to take in everybody's experiences and what they do to prepare. I kind of did that going into the in-studio position too, with people who have had experience. And I was trying so hard to do what they do. But I didn't trust my own instincts and what I know is natural for me. So I think going into that second half, I was like, all right, screw it. I'm not going to have any notes. I'm going to fly by the seat of my pants. I'm going to do it the way that I want to do it. And hopefully, it couldn't have gotten any worse than what I had just done. So the second time it went a lot better, but yeah, that was probably the most horrifying experience of my entire career.
After all that, would you recommend St. Cloud State as the go-to school for media broadcasting, given your time there?
Most definitely. The facilities are amazing. The equipment is top notch. I mean, they're not missing anything. And I know a lot of people that have graduated said that the equipment at St. Cloud State is 10 times nicer than what they're using at their now professional jobs. So I definitely think it gives you the highest caliber experience, and the people that you get to work with at UTVS or in Husky Productions or with KVSC, the friendships that you make too with your professors and your colleagues and stuff, I think is really what makes it special at St. Cloud State for sure. And the awards that everybody wins at the end of the year too is obviously a good thing to tack on the resume. But at the end of the day, I think it's just a good experience and so many opportunities to join, whether it's radio or television shows or this or that. I think it's open for a lot of experience and opportunity.
And that will conclude this week's Healthy Scratch segment there. Rachel Herzog, again, former women's hockey defenseman and current Husky Productions media personnel. Thanks again for joining us. We appreciate you having on.
Thanks, guys, so much.
Take the Huskies Warming House podcast wherever you go. Find the newest episodes or listen to your favorite on iTunes and Podbean. Get all the latest news and updates at huskieswarminghousepodcast.com and look for our Facebook page, the Huskies Warming House Podcast, as well as our Twitter feed at Warming House Den. Our Twitter feed will host trivia, updates, and questions for fans, as well as a mailbag where you can tweet us anytime with your questions, concerns, or listener suggestion. And for business inquiries, email us at huskieswarminghousepodcast@outlook.com.
And again, we say thank you to Rachel Herzog for joining us on this week's episode. Always a pleasure to catch up with her and kind of see what she's up to. So again, we wish her the best of luck moving forward. And her roles with Husky Productions, definitely a very well-run student organization, and we're excited for what the future holds for her. Speaking of future, Noah, our Souls After interview segment has to do something within the past, you could say, and it's not a pretty one, at least from what is initially out there. So this has to do with Minnesota Wild current general manager Bill Guerin. And last week, there was a former assistant coach to Wilkes-Barre Scranton, which is the AHL affiliate of the Pittsburgh Penguins. And essentially what we know and what's being alleged is the assistant coach, his wife, there was some sort of incident between the head coach and his wife where there was some possible, I guess, unwanted advance, some kind of episode, possibly in a hotel elevator, something of that sort. And then another similar episode or some secondary thing happened in the car with potentially all three of them that were involved. And then from what we know, where Bill Guerin gets involved is he alleges, again, as the assistant coach, that he had told Bill Guerin, who as the assistant general manager of Pittsburgh, he is the essential general manager of Wilkes-Barre Scranton, that this is what happened. I'm letting you know about it. Bill Guerin, according to the lawsuit, allegedly told him to be quiet about it. Again, and then essentially now he's hired with the Wild after he left. And essentially what the assistant coach is suing for is effectively for violating Pennsylvania whistleblower laws, as he was relieved of his duties shortly thereafter. And so it's important to talk about this on a couple of different viewpoints, right? Well, first of all, Bill Guerin did release a statement later on that day after TSN had originally reported the story and had said that he essentially very much denies these allegations and will obviously be going through the legal process. The Minnesota Wild organization also released a statement saying that they had a conversation with Bill Guerin and they, quote, fully supported him and will basically be backing him throughout the process. So obviously a lot to unpack here, Noah, but I think what's important to understand here is, there's, first of all, the optics don't look good, right? I think if you're sitting here and all we know is a very surface, at least as far as proven facts, maybe potentially, is it looks like the way that was framed is that Bill Guerin told somebody to keep quiet after his wife essentially was sexually abused by another coach. And then it was essentially, by their own words, kind of pushed under the rug, and then he was later fired. There's so much more that we have to learn from this. And so I think it's important to especially say now that there is a due process that everybody is entitled to. This is, I believe, a civil lawsuit. So I first want to, I guess, pose the question to you, Noah, and that is, first of all, as far as Bill Guerin is concerned here, as a Minnesota Wild fan, I guess when you first heard of this, what was your initial reaction? And I guess, how worried are you about, the story as it carries on forward through the legal process?
Well, when I first heard about it, I remember telling my parents, and I mean, to kind of back up, like through some of the events that night, like you mentioned, it's not pretty. I mean, when you read about the initial events here, from what I understand, I don't know if it was the head coach that was with the assistant coach's wife or if it was his boss, but either way, what had happened was they were leaving some sort of event or hotel room, and the assistant coach left his wife with his boss in, I don't know if it was like a lobby or an elevator. And I think he was getting a vehicle. He was not with the group and was going to reconvene with them when they exited the building. And what happened was this boss essentially went up to the assistant coach's wife and essentially grabbed her and started putting his hand underneath his shirt and saying a lot of sexually charged comments to her. And obviously she kind of tried to resist him in that. And then they all got in the vehicle together. And what had transpired was that this boss insisted he sit in the back seat with the wife while the assistant coach, the husband, drove in the front. And this boss essentially put his hand down her pants and was doing, pretty self-explanatory. So a very, very ugly thing. And a few days later, or shortly thereafter, the wife told the husband. He was mortified. So then he goes to management, which involves Penguins assistant GM Bill Guerin at this point. And like you said, it's noted that the original story says that Bill Guerin told him to be quiet about it. And that's where it ended. He didn't tell anybody. That's where it ended. And then shortly thereafter, in the early part of May, that coach that brought up this incident was fired, and it was called COVID-related cuts, which I don't know if you know much about hockey, but you generally don't cut a coach because of budgetary cuts. There's a lot of things that usually go before coaching staff. So like you mentioned, a lot to unpack here. And I was really worried about it at first because as much respect as I have for Bill Guerin, and like you mentioned, there is a due process. As much respect as I have for Bill Guerin, I understand Bill Guerin finished his playing career in the early 2010s. Bill Guerin is like a lot of other hockey players who grew up in our generation and before, where there are not everybody's a bad person in the game of hockey, but there were just a lot of things that got swept under the rug and were treated much, much differently in kind of the era, especially that you grew up in, versus where they are today, just in terms of the world and the hockey community. So that's where I said, as much as I hope and I don't want to think that Bill Guerin has done this, I don't put it out of my mind because I just know that he was once a highly touted NHL player back in the late 90s, early 2000s. That's just what it was. So my mindset changed a little bit, though. And granted, this could be a thing for posterity, but from what we've seen going back with Bill Guerin, as far as trades, as far as general manager moves have been concerned for the Minnesota Wild, and even back to his Pittsburgh days, very, very definitive guy, very straight. He's such a straight shooter. I mean, everything he says, I'm very hard pressed to find something that he said that hasn't been almost bluntly or blatantly obvious, and generally very, very true. So for him, when this story first comes out, within essentially a span of a day or two, to say, and I quote, When I learned of these allegations, I promptly brought them to Pittsburgh Penguins senior management. The allegations were quickly investigated. I emphatically deny anything to the contrary, end quote. To which then the Minnesota Wild also said that they discussed the matter with Bill Guerin and fully support him. And as it is a matter of active litigation, they will have no further comment. So for me, and again, due process, I hope that the truth, no matter how ugly or less ugly it is, that we do get the truth and we do get the correct story, and that the punishment or lack thereof fits the crime or lack thereof. But for Bill Guerin to come out and definitively say that, again, is it a show of posterity, or is it Bill Guerin being legitimate Bill Guerin that we've seen for a year and change up to this point with the Minnesota Wild, and saying, no, I did what I was supposed to do. This is BS. This lawsuit is horrible, but I did my part that I was supposed to do in the role that I was in. And if that is the case, if Bill Guerin did do his job, which again, this lawsuit, it should be resolved because it's terrible, but that falls on to Mario Lemieux and Jim Rutherford, I think, at that point, and some upper management there. Not that it doesn't fall on Bill Guerin, but at the end of the day, you keep climbing the ladder, someone's got to be accountable, and it's usually the star on top of the tree, or pair of stars in this case. So, yeah, I hope it's not true, but I feel a little more, not assured, but confident that Bill Guerin has some sort of honesty to his statement there.
So a couple of things struck me, right? And I like the detail you went into because I think it's important. The details of this suit matter, right? So there's a couple of really big question marks and things that we don't know about this. First of all, again, the original story depicts pretty much a very quick, I told this to Bill Guerin, he said to be quiet, and that's it. So typically, if we're going to take Bill Guerin's word, right, he is the AGM, right, which means if you're going to play by the rules, you're bringing this up to your boss. So you're bringing this up to GM, you're bringing this up to ownership. And so the question is, did that actually happen? Right? You hate to question it, but was it actually brought up to Rutherford / Lemieux and others who would, in I guess the worst case, the need to know people, right? 2, was it he that made the decision as an individual to say it, or was he a messenger? Meaning he did bring this up to upper management and they told him to tell the assistant coach to be quiet, so was he directed? So, there's so many small details that actually have a very large impact on where the onus of this actually goes, right? So do I think that Bill Guerin potentially could be off on this unscathed? It's possible. But there's a lot that's going to have to come forward to essentially leave him off the hook. So essentially...
the other thing too is, and this is a very small tidbit, but if you think about, that climbing that ladder, if you will, if Bill Guerin himself decides to go to upper management and tell this story, does the story sound the same as when it was told to him? And number two, and this is an obvious point, but if Bill Guerin, told him to be quiet, or even if he didn't tell him to be quiet, the thing that's a question mark right now is if you were serious about pursuing this, if you were Bill Guerin, or at least bringing this to Jim Rutherford and Mario Lemieux, and they have an interest in it, there's no depiction in this story yet that this assistant coach or this boss or the wife have ever sat down in a room with Mario and Jim Rutherford and or Bill Guerin,
right?
And that's what worries me, obviously.
Well, and here's the other part. So obviously the lawyers for Bill Guerin, for the Penguins, and even for the assistant coach, they're essentially going to look at, essentially company like operations books at this point, right? They're going to say or look for, hey, in this incident, do you have a standard or a procedure where if something like this is brought up to somebody in upper management, is there a detailed or at least some type of a plan on how to handle this? Meaning, does one, if this person finds out, does ownership or / general management need to know? And then, like I said, is there an internal investigation or is there like a third party that comes in and handles it? Like they want to know if there is a set procedure to how to handle this.
And why that's important is if there is one, and most companies have something like this, was it followed? Number one. Number two, if there was something that was in place and it wasn't followed, why wasn't it followed? And who was the one that acted out of procedure, right? The other part is, let's just say there isn't. That would actually be worse in this scenario, because now it shows from an organizational, kind of standpoint that they just simply were not prepared to handle this. And then the onus almost falls on everybody involved. So you talk about, again, with potential for these details to come forward and that really are going to matter, that's going to be one thing they're going to look for. And, for Bill Guerin, we certainly hope that, he was following what he was supposed to do. And again, like you mentioned, we don't know if there was ever a meeting, like either a one-on-one. We don't know if there was ever an internal investigation. We don't know if, again, a third party was brought in to assist with this that has more knowledge about it. And again, you hate to break down the comment too, right? Because in law, and especially criminal or civil, when they say keep quiet about it, was that meaning keep quiet about the incident, or keeping quiet that they did an investigation? And I hate to say this, but this is true. Or that we found that this did happen, but keep quiet about it, we're going to handle it internally. There's a big difference there. So you can't just assume either that, and that's what the claim in the lawsuit is wanting you to assume, is that he told you to be quiet about telling him. We don't know if that's actually what's being interpreted. So there's so many things that are going to have to be followed through in this. It's certainly a very interesting follow for Minnesota Wild fans and upper management. I know they'll be keeping a close watch on it. But as you mentioned, Bill Guerin, very, very upfront in public and, very much in denial about the allegations. And again, what strikes me is that with the Minnesota Wild organization, how quickly they threw their support. Now, again, they could easily withdraw back as more of this maybe is unfolded. But, again, we just have to kind of wait and see how this goes. And unfortunately, a lot of this information that is going to be important will be sealed as it is an active litigation. So we probably won't know a whole heck of a lot more details until it goes through some proceedings. But certainly going to be some tense moments for Craig Leopold, as with the Paul Fenton era. That didn't go so well. Bill Guerin, I think, has done a pretty good job as general manager from everything hockey related. And it would be a pain for fans and the organization itself to see a general manager, essentially go down for a situation that wasn't with the organization, but would take him down nonetheless, just for some past behavior. So it's certainly going to be one to watch, and we'll definitely, I know I'll be following it as anything comes along new.
Yeah, and also we don't know how that Pennsylvania whistleblower law fits into this too. So I'm very interested to see how that ties in. And just the very last thing, like you mentioned too, I hope the company does have a policy, because the worst thing that you want to see in this situation is an already very egregious and very sickening a series of events, I should say, that have already happened to this man and his wife. On top of that, you hope that there's some sort of precedent that can guide lawmakers and everything, through that process too. But again, we know as much as you know as listeners, and we'll keep you up to date. And in the realm of Minnesota Wild hockey, as well as our St. Cloud State Huskies, who are I shouldn't say both, actually, the women's hockey team is off until Christmas break. They're getting ready for their real break as college students. Kind of rare to see college hockey players get a normal break, if you will, as far as the women's hockey team is concerned. But the men's hockey team, they won't be coming back from their break until darn near Christmas, as they get ready for more action in the pod. And we'll have all that information and more for you throughout the week with our previews and breakdowns, as well as next week's show. So stay tuned. This has been episode number 40 of the Huskies Warming House Podcast.